Okay, so once again, welcome to this webinar this evening about Scottish glowworms that Charlotte has organised and put on, and has done so much work on glowworms, it's amazing. This is being recorded, as I mentioned previously. Throughout the talks, if you could put any questions in the Q&A box, we'll be able to pick up on those when we have time. We're going to try to keep to time if we can, but I think it's possible we might overrun because it is quite a packed schedule of talks for an hour. Unfortunately, Fiona is unable to attend due to childcare issues at the last minute, but I think we've got plenty to talk about anyway. So on that note, I think I will just pass straight over to Charlotte to begin, who has been doing all of this research into glowworms.
That's lovely. Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. I am so chuffed that you have all decided to sign up for tonight. I couldn't be more chuffed. We've got a lot to get through, so I'm just going to dive right into the presentation straight away once I've learned how to do it. There we go. So we're going to just start with the basic ecology and biology, and that is, what is the glowworm? So the common glowworm is actually a beetle, and its scientific name is Lampyris noctiluca, and that is part of the Lampyridae family, which is the fireflies. So yay, we have a firefly in Scotland, and it's the only one of the two UK native firefly species. The distribution is, they are actually quite widely distributed across the UK, Europe, Asia, and they almost extend as far north as the Arctic Circle. Scotland is probably considered to be on its most northerly and westerly of its range. So hopefully you can see there the basic life cycle diagram. So the eggs laid by the female in the summer in the undergrowth or at soil level, they take about 27 to 43 days to hatch, and that will be dependent on temperature and humidity. The larvae spend up to about 3 years in that stage, sort of 2 to 3 years. In the spring of their second or third year, they will pupate and they will emerge into their brief adult life. It's a very brief existence as an adult. So the wee larvae, they're actually quite a ferocious predator. And as you can see there, they're dark grey black with pale spots at the side of each segment. As you can see, they're predators of snails and slugs, and they hunt those down, and then they constantly nip at them, repeatedly nip at them with sharp, hollow mandibles. And as they're doing that, they're injecting a toxic substance that will both paralyze that prey, and it liquefies the flesh, so they basically have mollusk soup for supper. It's quite a messy affair, and they have to make sure that they don't get stuck in that slime. I'm not sure that this is actually the right term for it, but they do have this handy little organ on their sort of tail end, and I'm pretty sure it's called a pygopodium, which is a bristly tentacle-like affair, and it'll actually use that to clean itself up with. Larvae can and do glow. They'll give out sort of short, steady flashes, and I think the jury is out on that as to why they do that. It could be defense against predators, it could be practicing for their adult stage. I don't think it's absolute definite as to why they do that. They'll go through their instars, and the final instar, the females are usually considerably bigger than the males. So during the spring, summer and autumn, they'll hunt snails and slugs during the night, and they'll spend their winters either inactive or hibernating, and that's usually as their prey becomes a bit scarcer. And then it will be during the spring of its second or third year that they go on the march, and this will be when you might see them during the day, and they're out looking for a suitable pupation spot, and sometimes they'll pupate collectively, in groups. So this is the girl that you've all come to see. This is our adult female. As you can see, hopefully in that bottom picture, she is larva form, meaning she does resemble that larva, but she is lacking those pale spots. She's flightless and she's unable to eat. So that means that all the reserves that have been built up during the larval stage have now got to sustain both sexes through the reproductive stage. The glowing season is generally late May up to about late July, but records do come in across the UK for anything up to sort of back end of August into very early part of September. It's after dusk that they emerge to display for a few hours, and that's obviously to attract these winged boys. They generally don't go far from their pupation spot, and they don't go away too far from their displaying location. They'll only retreat to the safety of the undergrowth during the day. Once she's been mated, that lantern of hers will go out, and she will then proceed to lay her eggs, and eventually she will die as her energy levels are exhausted. And I think that she can kind of display for up to 10 nights before she perishes, before that energy sources is run out. And I think it's one of that things that I think there's research out there to suggest that for each night she's displaying egg production lessons. So it's obviously in her best interest to attract the boys as soon as possible. You can see there that in that far picture that her actual glow, and that is emitted from the 6th, 7th and 8th segments on the ventral surface. And it's 2 solid bands with the terminal segment having the 2 spots of light. It's a steady light. It's not like what you would think of a firefly signaling to each other, flashing. But she does actually twist her abdomen around, and I'm assuming that's in an effort to make sure that light is visible from all directions. I am no chemist, so I urge you to go and have a look at bioluminescence in its basic form. How I understand it, it is the molecule luciferin, and that reacts with oxygen and ATP, and I'm sorry, I cannot pronounce the full version of that. And that's with it's aided by a catalyst called luciferase, and that produces the bioluminescence. It's a cold energy efficient light, so it doesn't really cost her much in terms of energy. Just as a point of interest, luciferin and luciferase are actually named after Lucifer. And he is, I think, the light bringer. I think that means. So our adult male, he's a plucky wee male. As you can see there, he is far smaller than the female. He's more recognizable as a beetle, and I would argue that he's more recognizable as what we would maybe think of a firefly. He is winged, and as you can see in the other picture there, he is equipped with massive eyes, and they are specially adapted to detect that glowing females. And there is actually like a wee protective hood over them that I'm assuming protects him from the vegetation. And he'll fly low and he'll patrol looking for these glowing females, and then he will drop to them once he's detected them. As I've said before, he also cannot eat, so he will also die after just for a short adult life. They don't noticeably glow, the males. I think they have been observed glowing, but it's not something that you would generally notice. So what do we know about them in Scotland? To be honest, not a lot. We do know that they're here. The records are there. We know, any of you guys that are into invertebrates out there, as with all the invertebrates, they are vastly under-recorded. Very few folk have seen them. You're kind of looking at people that would, your mothers, your bat guys, your shepherds, gamekeepers, that kind of thing would maybe be out at that time of night. It is kind of like a specialized nocturnal survey. But they can be found in some surprising places with some surprising land uses. Some of these land uses you maybe wouldn't necessarily associate with invertebrate biodiversity. And these are commercial forestry plantations, marginal sheep farms, your sporting estates. They can be found coastal regions and road and rail networks, as well as like quarrying sites. All of these sites are supporting known populations, and that's Davina will go into it a bit further, but all of these habitats have that common feature of semi-unimproved grassland and scrub mix, and for the most part won't be blighted by artificial light. They'll be under dark skies, and obviously they've got to have good snail and slug populations. So what don't we know about them? Well, to be honest, a lot more than we do know about them. We don't know how they've got here. We don't know if that's from the ice sheet retreat and advancements. Could they've got here on, being attached to livestock or wildlife? Has it been human intervention? We just don't know. We don't know how widespread they are, although we do have the records in Scotland. Because they're under recorded, we just don't know how widespread they are, and we certainly don't know what their status is in Scotland. We don't know if they're declining or thriving. We just have no idea. On the more global scale for the species, the IUCN has it stated is that they're not evaluated, so I don't suppose that we can actually say for definite if they're officially vulnerable, endangered, of least concern, or whatever. Unfortunately, research in other parts of their range has shown that the populations are in decline, as with a lot of invertebrates, and this will be down to things like destruction of habitats, developments, intensive agriculture, pesticide use, and that's not directed at farmers, that's also at us gardeners with our slug pellets and our pesticide use. And there's also an artificial light factor as well. There's plenty of research, really good research out there that suggests that street lighting and whatever will have an impact on the male's ability to detect the glowing females. We also don't know what adaptations they may or may not have to our climate and latitude in Scotland. Again, I urge you to go and look at it. It's some really good research that came out of Finland that looked into the latitudinal gradient and how the females kind of responded to that. We also don't know how to look after them. There isn't really a definitive habitat management kind of deal going on with them. And again, looking at all the different habitats that they can be found in, it would be quite difficult to work that out. But the more data that comes in, the more we can understand them. So in the last 3 years, once I found out about glowworms, I decided to make it my mission to find out as much about them and research them in Scotland as much as possible. You'll see there on my records on iRecord, I haven't exactly got very far in 3 years. COVID did get in the way. Those records there don't necessarily indicate records that have, that the glowworms are on site. Some of the records that I put on will be nil records, and they're every bit as useful. I'm not quite sure if you can see it on the slide here, but under certainty I've put uncertain, and that's because I was on that site one night, one particular year, and I didn't happen to see them that night. That's not to say that the species isn't there. So I'm hoping folk going on to iRecord might look at that and go out there and prove me wrong. The rest of the year, I kind of go out looking for larvae. I do a lot of work promoting the species, events, not quite as big as this, but other events. Cashel is a place up in the Lomond Park that I've been up to a couple of times. Emma, the ranger, got me up there, and we did a couple of surveys and a couple of events, and we found the glowworms at Cashel, and they're now kind of looking out for them. And Gloria, the glowworm, as you can see there, my basic paper mache model got her premiere at Cashel. I'm generally self-funded. SRUC have contributed to a bit of my research in the form of equipment, but I generally fund myself. I recently set up a GoFundMe that was that so far it managed to accumulate enough that I was able to purchase a drone, and this is with the intentions of using it to orthomosaic habitat mapping. You can see there that I'm concentrating really hard because I'm a bit of a technophobe, and it's taken me a bit of while to learn to pilot it. So on the other pictures there, you can see it's not exactly a tough life going out looking for glowworms around Scotland. We live in one of the most beautiful places on earth, and being in a habitat that you kind of know during the day, it's a completely different beast at night. Even if you don't see glowworms, you are going to see and hear so much. You've got your moths and all your nocturnal wildlife. It's an amazing experience, and it's one that I highly can recommend. So the surveys themselves, there's not really anything set in stone, but this is kind of what I've been taught and what has worked for me. So I fully recommend doing your desk research first. Check out on the maps where it is you want to go. Look at the land use history. I would definitely recommend seeking permission from the landowner or the manager. They can be your best mates, and they might well have even seen them. And I've never come across a landowner or manager that hasn't allowed me on site And when I've told them that they've got glowworms on site, hasn't been very positive about them. And, you know, it's a firefly, what's not to love. But building that relationship with landowners and managers is really going to be your best friend. And then from your maps, you know, try and work out what you think your best transect route might be. And then to go with the, you know, the sign of the times, do your risk assessment. Try and work out what the risks might be. Obviously, walking around in the dark, mostly without the aid of torchlight, is going to carry inherent risk. So try and evaluate that. Then go and visit that site during daylight, either just before your survey, or on a separate, you know, on an initial visit. It's really quite vital to do that so that you can identify any hazards, and to see if what you saw on the map kind of correlates with what you're seeing in front of your eyes. Far better to go out with somebody. I have spent a lot of time out surveying by myself, but it's obviously better if you can go with somebody. It's safer, and 2 or more pairs of eyes is always going to be better than 1. I've missed a glowing female where somebody that's with me would have seen it. And then arrive on site before dusk. Your eyes will always need adjusting to that encroaching darkness. Don't expect to be able to get out of your car with, you know, after you've driven there with your headlights on, to be able to immediately adjust to encroaching darkness. As a general rule, you would be starting your transect about the level that you cannot detect colour. That will sort of differ between individuals, but as a general rule. And then I would certainly, for your own records, note the time and weather conditions and the moon phase. That can kind of help towards the data. And then, you know, take your time, just walk slowly, concentrate viewing the lower vegetation either side of you and up ahead. If you've got a clear view, you can quite often see glowing females quite far ahead of you. I didn't measure it, but I'm pretty sure it was about 40 feet that I've seen glowing females ahead of me. And then don't forget on your return to carry on looking. As I said earlier, the females will turn off their glow once they've been mated, you know, and retreat down to lay their eggs. And they don't go far from that spot. So if you spot a female that you hadn't spotted on your way out, it could very likely be, you know, a completely different female, you know, that might have lit up later. Note the position of the glowing female, your grid references, and this is from my research. And if you are happy to get in touch with me, note the female's position in relation to that vegetation height. I quite often find females glowing right at ground level and quite often under vegetation, as opposed to how you would think that they would behave, which would be further up the vegetation. And then obviously, please submit that record, and Mark will go through with you with that. So there's obviously ethics involved. Torchlight isn't a good idea. A, you're going to miss the glowing females, and B, it's got the potential to disturb wildlife. If you do have to use a torch for safety reasons, please just use it briefly. And a red torch, you can get torches with like the red, or put one of those, you know, like the Quality Street wrappers or whatever, put one of them over it. It's less disturbing to wildlife. And believe me, this comes from bitter experience. When you're out in the dark and you put a white light torch on and then turn it off, it takes far longer for your eyes to adjust back to the dark. A red torch, or even you get the green ones as well, they're far better for your eyes. Please don't put them in jars. The soldiers of World War I, they are actually on the War Memorial glowworms. They put them in jars and whatever. They actually used them to read maps and letters from home. They had the risk that if they turned lamps on, they were going to get shot by a sniper. We don't have that risk, and there's no need for us to be putting them in jars. However, sometimes it is necessary to handle them. You might want to check if that is actually a female or a larva. If you are going to handle them very gently. Her light will not go out. Make sure that you do it very carefully, and then please replace her back to the exact spot that you found her. She will have chosen that spot to display from for a reason, as yet unknown, but she would have chosen that spot, and it's imperative that you put her back where you found her. Photography is absolutely fine. I have used flashes, my camera flash to take pictures. I'm an absolutely rubbish photographer of glowworms, it has to be said. There's people, I'm sure, amongst this audience that will be far better photographers than me, but please don't repeatedly flash them. Once you've got your picture, don't keep taking pictures. when I give you the website, you can actually, I have put some survey guidelines, you know, and guidance and a risk assessment template and a field survey form on the website there. Oh, how have I gone? How have I not gone? What have I done there? Oh, there we are. So the future for Scottish glowworms, is there a future? I think there is a very bright future, excuse the pun, for Scottish glowworms. More surveys and data are needed. The more data that we can get in, the more we know. And it also adds to the national and global firefly/invertebrate status data. And you know, it'd be great if Scotland can contribute towards that. I'm going to be doing some targeted research this year. I'm looking into that adaptations that they might have to our own climate and you know, our special climate and latitude that we have here in Scotland. I've also started the very, very baby steps of a population genetics study. I'm not going to see this one out, I'm too old. So I'd be looking to pass that one on eventually. Loads more species profile raising. We've got an exciting year ahead of us for this. You might just be seeing glowworms on the telly up here and on the radio. And then I'm hoping to develop Scottish glowworms as a constituted group, and that's with the hope of accessing community funding. I'm going to be growing the website, the YouTube channel. Well, I hope to put surveys, you know, actually put surveys on so people that can't get out to see glowworms can actually see them on YouTube. Loads more fundraising, you know, trying to dip into funding streams. The new website is up and running now. It's still kind of being developed, but it is up and running, and you'll find loads of information there. And obviously hoping as a constituted group to be able to access funding streams. You can see that picture there, that's a known that's my main glowworm site, and obviously you can see that it's in need of a bit of help. Unfortunately, I've had to dip into the world, the dark, murky world of commerce and go for the whole merch thing. You can see the hats there. And if it's good enough for the World Wildlife Fund, it's good enough for Scottish glowworms. We're going to be sort of like doing a very, very inexpensive Adopt a Glowworm scheme. And any of the fundraising will go into just further research, surveys, and hopefully into habitat management. So why do I think they're important? And obviously, I think we all know that invertebrates are such a vital part of a healthy ecosystem, that food web, and they're such good indicators of change. You know, anything happens on a site, it's the invertebrates that will tell us first. You know, that canaries in the mine kind of deal. As an opening to sort of introducing people to the world of invertebrates, and probably especially nocturnal invertebrates, glowworms, you really couldn't have any better. I have never come across anybody that's gone, "Ugh, squish a firefly." That just doesn't get said. Everybody, as soon as you speak to them about fireflies, is, you know, all ears. So you've got their attention straight away, and it's a great introduction to invertebrates. And you know, I've yapped away to people about glowworms, and then my other passion is moths. So it's like, oh, and did you know about moths? Blah blah blah. Science, it's not particularly something that I maybe agree with, but look up at the role that fireflies, and it's specifically the chemicals that cause that bioluminescence, and the role that they have played in medical research. It is fascinating to how that, you know, that chemicals have played a part in that. I think it's in vaccines and treatments and whatever. So ways that you might be able to, you know, want to help, please consider going out to look for them. Do it safely. But the more records we can get in, the more that we can help, not just the glowworms, but other invertebrates as well. Record them. Mark will take you through all of that. I hope some of you are following Scottish Glowworms on Twitter. We'll try and keep you updated on anything that's happening and on surveys and whatever. Visit the new website. Like I said, it's still kind of in development, but there's going to be a blog, you know, the group, the glowworms, information about the glowworms themselves, surveying guidelines, lots of glowworm information, and links to research that, you know, this brilliant research that's been going on. And please contact me on the email address that you see there. Chat away to me about glowworms. If we quite often, you maybe get, oh yeah, I remember seeing glowworms, blah. Chat to us about that. Any surveys that you kind of want to plan, and if you're, you know, how to go about planning them. And if you really are interested in being a part of developing Scottish glowworms, then I would love to hear from you. And just for general, general firefly and glowworm chat. So that's basically about it, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this, and I really can't thank you all enough for attending. It really has meant the world to me to see so many of you book tickets. I'm absolutely floored, and I really hope you enjoy the rest of the evening and will be inspired to go and look for them. And I'd really like to thank Chris Cathrine, Mark Pollitt, Davina, and Fiona, even though she couldn't be here, SRUC and Jim Alder. Without these people behind me, I really wouldn't be sitting here, waffling on to you about glowworms tonight. So thank you very much. And I'm now going to pass you back to Chris.
Thanks, Charlotte. That was really, really, really interesting, unsurprisingly. We're getting quite a few questions in, but I think what's probably best is to continue through with the talks and maybe take the questions at the end, and see where we get to with that. So,
yeah, I think that's probably better, because some of the questions might also connect with Davina or yourself or Mark. Maybe
it's possible. It is possible. We'll see, and maybe some of the questions will bounce off each other and be synergistic as well by then.
Yeah.
So now I'm going to pass over to Davina Gray, who's a graduate ecologist, an SRUC student and a botanist, and she's going to talk to us about habitats and vegetative classifications. On you go, Davina.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thank you, and thanks, Charlotte. That was a terrific start. As Chris says, I'm an ecologist. I have a passion for wild plants. Charlotte and I met about a year ago through a college student ranger group, and of course I was immediately drawn into her wonderful world of invertebrates. My role today is to talk about the habitats of the glowworm, or at least what we think we know. As Charlotte has already said, there is very little we can say with absolute certainty about these creatures because we lack so much data on their habitats and ecology. However, I will endeavour to paint for you a broad picture of what we believe to be true so far, based on Charlotte's years of study and surveying efforts. I'd just like to say very quickly that vegetation classification is constantly evolving. I think of it as a kind of a dark art. Therefore, some of the ecological classifications I'm using today may already be in question. However, these terms will suit our purposes for now. So as Charlotte's already covered, glowworms exploit different types of vegetation in different ways and at different times during the year and during their life cycle. The eggs are often laid in moist places near the base of a tuft of grass or under moss. Once hatched, the larvae then immediately go in search of food. Since we know their main food source is small snails, then we already have a head start, since most of us have a good idea where we might find snails. The glowworm's favourite food is most likely to be the brown-lipped snail. Like most snails, they like a variety of habitats. Everything from grassland to woodland, scrub to sea cliff. So already we're beginning to see how varied the glowworm habitat could be. And of course, snails also require a suitable level of calcium to keep their shells in tip-top condition. They also prefer moist conditions, which is our first major clue in finding the glowworms. Charlotte's research so far reveals a tantalising mix of habitats, from farmland to railway sidings, forestry rides to quarries. But for the purpose of tonight's talk, we've tried to pin down some of the commonality between these habitats in an attempt to give new surveyors a starting point. So here is my fantasy glowworm habitat sketch. And most ecologists will recognise this as a complete figment of my imagination. In reality, these species don't exist in quite the way I've illustrated here. However, it may prove useful to get to know some of these easily distinguishable species of plants and their habitats before going out in the field. It's a common misconception, as Charlotte's already said, that the glowing female needs tall vegetation to attract a male. Previous surveys have proved the contrary, with one female discovered glowing under bracken. Often though, they glow out in the open, and are sometimes on bare rock or soil. Hence why we begin on the left of the sketch, where the rock and the gravel meets the low grasses and open sward. You will also notice that we are surrounded by sheep farming and forestry in my sketch, because research to date suggests a strong link to both these land uses, though Charlotte's already outlined the caveats to that. During the day, the larvae and the females shelter under vegetation, so require some ground cover for this. Therefore, we move on to grasses and rushes. Cocksfoot and soft rush are pictured here. Again, they're commonly found in moist or even wet places, often accompanied by a ground layer of feather mosses and herbs or forbs, such as crosswort and lady's bedstraw. On cultivated lands, such as road verges and railway sidings, we might find the oxeye daisy, which favours drier soils on well-drained sites, although these can include meadows. Grasslands are often mesotrophic, which means they flood often or occasionally and can be quite high in nutrients. And these can be acidic or neutral, but should only be semi-improved, as Charlotte's already mentioned. Botanical interest increases in some neutral lowland grasslands, which we've seen. These could even include common sorrel, broadleaf dock, nipplewort, and red clover. Ruderal species at the edges, such as nettles and thistles, cannot be ignored. Black knapweed on the right of the sketch is regularly to be found where glowworms live, as to our gorse and hawthorn, which occupy the shrub layer at the edge of a field or a road. Glowworms, in fact, don't mind a little overhanging vegetation, such as the woody shrubs of an ecotone. Indeed, edge habitats is probably the best umbrella term for the glowworm's favoured locations. Edges of fields, edges of forestry, edges of roads, edges of railways, and so on, though we're not exactly sure why. This drone image from Charlotte illustrates exactly this mosaic of habitats. MG10 Rush Pasture, which consists largely of Holcus lanatus, Yorkshire fog, and Juncus effusus soft rush. These are poorly drained, permanent pastures, which is clear from the wetland areas within it. Note the presence of forestry and the lack of artificial light. Surveys so far indicate favourable conditions where forestry meets mixed sheep farming and open rank grassland. These two images illustrate the diversity of these habitats and, in some ways, the adaptability of our glowworms. Essentially, any area which has had minimal human interference, no pesticides, no fertilisers, and no artificial lighting is likely to attract glowworms. Even some coastal habitats are currently supporting glowworm communities, such as the Inner Hebrides, and even degraded bog sites could feasibly support glowworms where the dried out sphagnum moss has given way to grassland and woodland. From a management perspective, it is difficult to replicate an ideal glowworm habitat, not least because we've yet to understand so much about them. However, no pesticides, no fertilisers, no artificial light is an excellent way to start. If you find glowworms on your property, all you need to do is maintain its condition. Sheep grazing is fine, it seems. In fact, it may even be beneficial. But cattle grazing can cause poaching, and horse grazing often leads to souring of the soil. They don't mind a bit of human disturbance, but not interference. And they have been found quite happily living on the edges of sporting estates, gardens and farms, where they find suitable conditions either for hunting or mating. In reality, glowworms can be found where there is a patchwork of all of these habitats, or even just a small community of suitable plants. So it's best to expect the unexpected and assume nothing. Finally, a last word on biodiversity. These edge habitats we spoke about can give rise to something called the edge effect, which is much written about in conservation circles. The edges of habitats can become transitional zones which allow an intermixing of species that can move readily between both environments. It's thought that this often leads to a higher biodiversity. And if we think of those mesotrophic grasslands I mentioned earlier, for instance, imagine them becoming species-rich grasslands, full of wildflowers and invertebrates. A habitat good for glowworms can also be good for a whole host of beneficial insects and other invertebrates. Thank you for listening. I'll hand back to Chris.
Thanks, Davina. That was really, really interesting. And I think we'll just jump straight over to Mark. I'm sure Mark can give us a fantastic introduction to his role and recording. I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you, Chris. Let me just get my share. Where's it gone? Has that come through okay? Lovely. Thanks, Chris, and preceded by Charlotte and Davina for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about glowworms in southwest Scotland and a little bit about recording in general. So I suppose I should switch to an appropriate mode for this evening's talk and get into the mood for the right thing before we go on a little bit further. I'm going to start off, before I talk about that, about where I found, when I saw encountered my first glowworm, which was somewhat completely different. For those of you who have a keen eye, you may recognise the fact that this isn't really southwest Scotland. In fact, it's actually southwest England. It's Gloucestershire, and I used to live here on the edge of the Cotswold Escarpment in the Stroud Valleys, into a house right there with a couple of mates who used to work in similar fields in a shared house. And I didn't really have an interest in anything other than birds at the time, but we all had a bit of a wildlife interest, and these two creatures actually featured quite strongly in us discovering glowworms local to us, but not through their grazing or pastures or anything, but more as a feature of their likelihood of being used and seen in the form of a pub, because that actually got us to go out in the evening and encounter them. So fortunately, being three lads and in our 20s, we enjoyed the odd beer or two. Unfortunately, the very local pub was rather poor in its beer offering. So it made us walk a little bit further along the old railway line, which is converted into a rather nice cycleway and footpath up to the near village with a nice pub with a beer garden and real ale and good food. Or sometimes up the hill, up onto the common at the top, and up to another rather nice pub at the top. And we'd had an enjoyable evening there, and then wandered back much the same way, in approximately the same way, back home. And it was on those nocturnal walks back along those habitats that we sort of encountered our first glowworms. Fascinating to see. So annoyed with myself, actually, that I wasn't really focused or interested in the same way as I am now. At the time, I had a bird interest, my bird head was switched on at the time. So I don't even have all detailed records of where we saw them at the time, but I have put the vague, rather broad brush records onto the national database fairly recently, so that 1 kilometre square that they were in is now on the map, as it were. Time moved on. I moved away, moved in with my partner, moved to a different area, and glowworms passed me by for some time until I moved to southwest Scotland, in 2004, it just happened to be the Nightjar survey year from the British Trust for Ornithology, and I agreed to do a square in southwest Scotland when I moved up here, to cover a square for the national survey and national census. And I did this square here, which was Lotus Hill. It has Kissock Forest at the foot of it, and it's it's a former nightjar site. And if you want to see where it is, you can see on the map there. It's just a little bit west of Dumfries, just past, with Maybe Forest just on the left-hand side in this picture here. Criffel overlooking the Solway on the top, so we're looking southwards. Dalbeattie would be right off the map as we're looking on the map there. And I turned up no nightjars at all. I did turn up some glowworms, which completely surprised me because I had no idea that they occurred in southwest Scotland at all. And by great good fortune, it happened to be the year that a gentleman called Jonathan Willett was was collating information about Scottish glowworms and trying to put some information together to report to the national database. So having sent my record off to Jonathan, we put information out locally and tried to get a bit of feedback from people, put something in the local newspaper, sent things out in our newsletter. And we collated a few records for which we wouldn't otherwise have known about, which was rather nice to add a bit of a picture, and started to get a picture that Southwest Scotland wasn't half bad for glowworms, and there's quite a few records around. Some of them turned out to be quite old. We eventually got pointed out to something here. I think I can thank someone who's in the audience here for pointing this one out to me. Nick, if you're there, thank you for pointing this one out to me. So this is from an old parish statistical account from 1845 for the parish of Tonglen near Kirkcudbright. And the minister who wrote this obviously had a very keen interest in wildlife and wrote a rather nice section about flora and fauna, of which one paragraph was devoted solely to glowworms. And he talks about seeing their sparkling gems over the meadows locally. And he used to go and collect glowing females and bring them back to the manse garden for his entertainment. Not great glowworm conservation initiative, unfortunately, but I dare say they were clearly quite prolific in the area at the time. And he even goes on to talk quite amusingly about how, having put some in a patch of grass on the garden, one of his servants thought that the grass was on fire that evening and came running in rather worried. But he wrote a rather nice line at the end, which says, the poor woman who'd never seen in her life so many glowworms had some reason for her apprehensions, as many a blaze is less brilliant than the lustre of these earth-born Pleiades, which I think is a rather fantastic and beautiful way of describing a starry night of a cluster of glowworms glowing. So that was rather nice. So historical records began to get a little picture that they'd clearly been prolific in some areas, at least of our region, in the past. And another publication shows that with information, which was a publication I think came out about 5-6 years ago, about the railway which runs between Dumfries, or used to run between Dumfries and Stranraer. And the gentleman writing it had stayed at Gatehouse Station which is just north of Gatehouse, and had talked about the glowworms that used to be on the railway line there. There would be a dozen or more on almost every sleeper between the station and the viaduct being the one which is now part of Cairnsmore National Nature Reserve. So this was, even if we allow for a little bit of exaggeration here, clearly they were present in some numbers in the area. And I know Charlotte has actually been out to this site and had a look for them, and unfortunately hasn't turned them up yet. But I don't think it's out of the question that they could be in that area, or even somewhere else along the old railway line that used to run between Stranraer and Dumfries. So I mean, if you are going to start off looking for something, that would be a great place to start looking for new sites for glowworms, finding somewhere which has got a little bit of that nice edge habitat. There's quite several bits of that now are pathed or part of trails and tracks. I might provide a potential place for finding new glowworm sites in Dumfries and Galloway. If we take a look at the map, you can ignore the text on this map. That's just an acknowledgement to those data providers who are of that. This is a map from the NBN Atlas to just give a broad picture of the distribution of glowworms in the UK, to give you an idea of where they are. You can see that if you look at a line from the Mersey to the Wash, from west to east, and south of that, that's quite widespread, and north of that they get rather patchy. And if we zoom in on Scotland, you can see that we have the west has the most significant clusters of records, particularly the Argyll and the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park area, and in Dumfries and Galloway, and just stretching them into the Scottish borders. And I'm sure one or two of those dots on the Scottish borders edge there may well relate to work from Charlotte as well. So if I zoom into the region that our records are held, we're part of the local environmental records, or a local environmental records centre for southwest Scotland. So we collate information for Dumfries and Galloway and Ayrshire. So we collate information and share that information and make that available. So this is the map of the records we hold on our database, and that's shown at 10 kilometre squares. The darker dots show recent records, and the pale hollow dots show older records. So the cutoff year between the two is the year 2000. So, so post-2000 records are filled circles on this map. It was the same on those previous maps. I should have mentioned that the paler dots were older records. So you can see in our region, if we break that down a little bit more finely in terms of resolution, you can see that we have a good cluster of records, mainly in the centre of our region. So it seems to be, which corresponds to Cucubriccia in general, with just a few records out in the east, in Dumfriesshire, and a few records further west as well. And I just want to highlight one or two interesting recent records or recent finds that have added to our local knowledge from people who've been putting records on iRecord, which I'll talk about afterwards, and people who've been sending records in and reporting sightings of the last few years. Some nice dots have appeared on the west coast of Wigtonshire, right out on the Rins of Galloway. This photograph here was what is taken from a record posted on the iRecord website. Record glowing female out there, and there's another one been posted in a different square just below it fairly in the last few years as well. We had, until a few years ago, we had until a few, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we had no records at all out on that peninsula. So we've got now new records turning up over there. They've obviously been there all along, almost certainly, but there just aren't that many people going out looking for them. So real opportunity there for people to add to knowledge just by getting out and having a look for them. Once now you know what to look for, as Charlotte has pointed out there, and the sorts of habitats, as Davina's mentioned, then opportunity to get out, have a walk in the dark, and see if we can find some suitable habitats. Another record, interesting one, came in again. I think this was last year's record as well. This is a nice one of a glowworm larvae, a daytime record. So this is a larvae with potentially filmed with its next lunch, or photographed with its next lunch. There's in a forest near to Dalbeattie, and another one here in a new square for us locally, which is an adult female found in the daytime at Glentrule. This is interesting in that it's actually not that far off the Ayrshire border, part of the Galloway Forest Park. And it may be that we haven't got any records at the moment, recent records in mainland Ayrshire that I'm aware of. And it may be that Galloway Forest Park could have some Ayrshire glowworms tucked away somewhere in amongst the forestry. So that would be a great place to start looking. We know that they're not far away, certainly on the Dumfries and Galloway side there. Where they are in Ayrshire, the one site that we know that they are there is up on the island of Great Cumbrae, which is, and I think Charlotte's recorded them there, and someone else has recorded them there previously as well. Clearly, an interesting photograph here, which is a larvae, which is making a rather risky maneuver, crawling across the back of as Chris will rather enjoy, as back of a common lizard. It looks like a rather risky maneuver, if you ask me, for a glowworm larvae. But I don't know the outcome of that little encounter, but I hope it treaded very lightly, is all I can say. It does go to show that they are out there, and these are all fairly recent records from the last few years that people have turned up and can find new areas as well. So what can people help with, I guess, is the next question. And one of the obvious things that people can do is report historical records. We're not just interested in new records. If people saw them when they were a child and collected them in a jam jar when they were camping somewhere in Scotland, well, tell us about them. Or in fact, in any part of the UK, tell us about them. It's really interesting to know where they used to be, because those can help us form places where we can go and revisit and try and find them again in more recent times. They give us points that we can search for continued presence of them, which is great. So maybe just if you've got you've seen them yourself, if you know of a fisherman who's seen them when they've been out fishing at night or anything like that, do tell us, and we can try and put those confirm those historical records, put them on the map, and maybe try and go and visit those sites to see if they're still there. What about another opportunity is to check old sites. So one thing that you can really do is to look at some of these old sites and go and visit where they used to be and see if there are any records there. Now, the really old records quite often are quite vague in terms of their location. So the more, so it becomes a little bit difficult sometimes to track down, but plenty of opportunity there for people to go and look at in squares or areas, look at their habitat in those places to see if we can turn some of those hollow dots from old records into filled dots for more recent records, which is really good. And even some of we have to also need to bear in mind that some of the records that have got filled dots on our maps, whether it be here in Southwest Scotland or elsewhere, some of them are, may only have been visited once or twice in the last 20 years or so. So we may only have odd one on record. It's not, many of the sites are not getting visited regularly. So plenty of opportunities for continued recording and updating of records. And finally, of course, you can look for new sites, and it would be lovely to put a few new dots on maps in new areas, and hopefully with Davina's help and Charlotte's help of pointing us into sort of places where we might look, that might give us people a little bit of an inkling as to where we might go start searching. So plenty of opportunity there. What happens if you do find one and want to make a record? Well, all records, all wildlife records need 4 key bits of information. The 4 W's as often referred to, the what, where, when, and who. And the what is the name of the species that you're recording. So in this case, it would be glowworms. The where is a location, a place name, and a grid reference to go with it so we can locate it on the map. When is a date. For historical records, that may be quite vague, and it doesn't matter for historical records if the date isn't precise. We can cope with that on all of our databases. The more precise, the better, obviously, but if we have old historical records and we only know a year, I mean, I have some records and which we only know where maybe date back to 1940s or 1950s, we can still put those records on database because it gives us a time frame and a historical picture of where they are. So we can deal with that sort of information. And who is the recorder's name of the person recording it, so that they're stored with alongside the record, and we have a contact, a person who we can attribute the record to. Now, we may gather extra information as well, and I'll touch on this in a minute, but the core information always has to be what, where, when, and who. And the extra information really adds useful information for people like Charlotte, who are studying them, the UK Glowworm Survey, Scottish Glowworm, people who are looking at them in detail and wanting to understand their ecology. So the extra bits really help those people who are doing research or understanding them, so we can hopefully provide a little bit of conservation for them in future years. I'm going to point, I mentioned this already, and I think a couple of people have mentioned it in the chat or in the questions. If you have records, I would thoroughly, really encourage you to use this website to put your records on, called irecord.org.uk. It's an online site. You can go on there. You can record absolutely any UK wildlife on there, but one thing it's particularly good for is it's good for glowworms because there's a specific data entry form for glowworms on the site. So as you can see from here, you can fill in, you can go to the site, you can go and have a look under the record menu and pick the data entry form for glowworms, and it'll ask you questions specifically about your glowworm sighting or your glowworm search. Someone asked earlier on in the chat whether or not you can go to a site and enter blank missing records, or I didn't find any records. And you can, there is indeed a possibility on there where you can use the nothing at all box here to tick that if you have, if you looked for glowworms at a site but didn't find them. So you can do that as well. So, but it gives you opportunity there to put in how many females or males or larvae that you saw You can add photographs of what you saw, so which is great. If you've photographed a larvae and maybe you're not 100% certain of the identification, someone will come along and verify the record for you. If it's a glowworm larvae, it'll be accepted, or if not, they'll hopefully be able to point you towards the identification of a different thing if you're incorrect. But hopefully that photograph really helps with the verification of records if you can. There's an interactive map for picking grid references, which I'll come back to in a second. And if you go further down the form, you can enter useful information that Charlotte mentioned earlier for things like what type of site it is, whereabouts was the position of the glowworms, was there any lights nearby, things about that. Again, helpful information for those who are studying glowworms and want to understand them better. The interactive map's really helpful. It saves you having to look up a grid reference, which is really nice. So you can just click on a square and it will zoom you in to the map, and it will then zoom you in if you click in again. And then all the time it's filling in the grid reference box for you for the one highlighting. And as you highlight a more accurate record there, hopefully you want to get down to at least a 6-figure grid reference. So which will be a two-letter abbreviation, which tells you which part of the country you're in, which big square you're in, and then 6 digits. And that gives you an accuracy of 100 meters square on the map. And that is great, because having an accurate record like that simply means that if people are going back to visit sites again, it gives them a central point upon which they can look for them at a site again. If you have a broader grid reference, it's hard to pinpoint your search. So if we're going to look and repeat visits to sites, accurate grid references really, really helps. You don't have to have a login to use the iRecord website. One of the nice benefits, if you do have one, is that you can go and explore other people's records. So you can, as I've done here, look at other people who use iRecord and have reported glowworms, and I've filtered glowworms here, and you can use this map as an interactive map to be able to click on them and have a look at where glowworm sightings have been made in your area, or if you're visiting a different area where they've been seen before. So it's a really nice way of seeing what other people who are using iRecord have recorded. So, but you need to have an iRecord account to be able to use that. So, but that's a really good way of doing it. That takes me through my bit on recording. Thank you very much for listening. I'll try and answer any questions again in the chat that have come up there. I'm going to hand you back now to Chris.
Thank you, Mark. Absolutely loved the animations and the story about the pubs. So we are running a bit late, but we'll just keep on going. And this is being recorded, so if anybody does have to run away, we will get it up online somewhere after the event, and you can watch it then. So I'm just going to, so the next person talking is me. So I'm going to give my presentation. Now I have to say that I'm the odd one out here. I'm not talking about glowworms, unfortunately. So this will give you plenty of time to think about glowworms, and oh, 1 second, I'm still running this, one moment. So it'll give you plenty of time to think about glowworms and ask more questions in the chat, hopefully. There we go, hopefully that's working. So, yeah, I didn't introduce myself very well at the start, I do apologize. I am Chris Cathrine, I'm the director of Caledonian Conservation. Now, Caledonian Conservation has been supporting Charlotte as an intern with us for some time, which is how I'm connected with Charlotte. And she's been absolutely amazing, as you can see from her presentation, and everything and all that she's achieved. And she's really done this herself. She's a fantastic individual. We've tried to help any way we can along the way, but this is really all down to Charlotte. And she very kindly asked me to give a presentation about what Caledonian Conservation does, and also about how data is used by professionals. Now, Mark's covered very well recording and the best ways of doing all of that. And I'll just talk a little bit about how we use data as professionals. And if we had more glowworm data, we would be able to use that more often in the kind of work that we do. But to make sure that I'm not completely glowworm free, I shall say I first saw glowworms actually when I was a ranger down in Wales. So I am from Scotland, I'm from Edinburgh originally, but I didn't see glowworms until I was down in Wales, well, that'd be a lot of my 20s. But they are magical beasties. I've seen many since and abroad as well. And nightjar surveys seem to be quite a good way of spotting them. I think Mark mentioned nightjar surveys himself. Also, I'm quite a fan of Scots as a language. And so I'm aware of 2 Scots names for glowworms. There's the Leary licht, which licht means light. Leary has a couple of meanings, so I've not really looked into the etymology of it all, but Leary can mean a lighter for a light, and can also mean fanciful, or beautiful. And so it's quite nice. And the other one is Lowry licht, which is foxlight, which is pretty cool. Anyway, that's all you get on glowworms from me, I'm afraid. So I'm just going to give a wee overview of Caledonian Conservation, what we do. I'm going to talk a bit about biodiversity data and different types of data. And then I'm going to just do a quick case study showing how data can be used. And I've picked a few site condition monitoring projects of protected sites that we've done for Nature Scots, because they demonstrate how different data can be useful in different circumstances, and then some conclusions. So this is Caledonian Conservation, or some of us anyway, out doing some water rescue training. It's always important to be safe, and that was great fun as well. We're an ecological consultancy, and we're established in 2010. We're still waiting for opportunity to celebrate our 10th anniversary. COVID did get a bit in the way of that. We're based near Bridge of Allan, but we cover all of Scotland and all of the UK, and we increasingly do work in other countries. So for example, we do quite a bit of work in Isle of Man and Ireland, and that was something that was building up before COVID and kind of stopped, and now it's coming back, which is fantastic. This is the view from our office. So even when we're not out in the field, we're still wonderfully connected with nature. We currently have 8 members of staff, although we are needing to recruit some more assistant ecologists and potentially ecologist level people. So if you're looking for a job and that's something that works for you, then please send me an email with your CV and we can have a chat. And we work with loads of associates, so people who have real expert skills that we can bring in for that expertise when we need it. We work on developments of all sorts, so renewable energy. We do work on buildings, so often bats and roofs and that kind of thing. Work on infrastructure such as railways, roads. I work with forestry, not quite development, but there are many similarities. And we do surveys of all sorts, which gets us to wild places. And we get to drive off-road, which is fun, although probably not environmentally great, but we've got an excuse. We get to go camping. I love wild camping, and I get to combine that with my work. We do all sorts of surveys, so mammal surveys, using camera traps as well for cryptic species, bird surveys of all sorts, reptile surveys, amphibian surveys. These are some natterjack toadlets, which are very cute. Invertebrate surveys. Invertebrates are a big passion of mine. That's and particularly arachnids, and that's the lichen running spider, Philodromus margaritatus, which is its distribution is largely in Scotland anyway, and it seems to be associated with Caledonian Forest. Bryophyte surveys and vascular plants as well. I'm afraid not an area that I know a huge amount about myself. We do ecological impact assessments and write those. They get published. People can read them. We discharge planning conditions. We do ecological clerk of works, so make sure that mitigation is implemented during construction and such. So there's some ecological clerk of works looking after slow worms during some railway repairs in Dumfries and Galloway. We do post-consent monitoring just to see the impacts of developments after they're operational. That's often wind farms really. And translocations we've been involved in. So we've done various translocations for like great crested newts and whatnot, and we've moved reptiles out of the way. but we've also had the opportunity to really develop techniques to translocate wood ants. So this is a wood ant nest being translocated for the school in Aviemore. We do work for non-governmental organizations and charities, which include surveys again, do a lot of surveys, conservation research. So we've been looking at distribution of grass snake in Scotland, for instance. We help with conservation management, public interpretation. So we help with TV and film and such and events and things, provide photos. This is helping a Channel 5 documentary get the footage they wanted for particular species of spider at Flanders Moss. Helping again, Flanders Moss comes up a lot. That's helping, that was getting some footage and things of the bog sunjumper spider in Flanders Moss. The Channel 5 documentary is actually looking at a different species of spider, but Flanders Moss is brilliant for bog sunjumpers. It's that's a feature of the protected site, and they're very cute and shiny. We also were involved in an Australian spider documentary called 16 Legs that was narrated by Neil Gaiman, and we helped get that out on Blu-ray as well. And as part of that sponsorship, as it were, there will be a series of special screenings in schools around Scotland with Q&A with the filmmakers. It's just been delayed a bit due to COVID. We sometimes represent other organizations at meetings where they're looking for our expertise. And we support an urban biodiversity project in Mumbai in India. And here's some beautiful pictures from that project sent to me by Javed Ahmed, who is in the photo down there, and also watching this webinar and in the chat. One day I hope to see that in real life. And we support other charities such as Ghostbusters of Glasgow, who raise money for Glasgow Children's Hospital. And we do work for statutory nature conservation organizations, so more surveys, conservation management, designing methods and guidance, such as this guidance for reptile mitigation. And we do help inform policy. We provide expert advice on planning decisions, and we partner with other organizations in research and do specimen identification, such as this wandering spider, Phoenitria boliviensis, which came in with some bananas in Aberdeenshire. That was pretty cool. We do a lot of training, so that can be professional, for example, through the Chartered Institute of Ecology and Environmental Management or other organizations. We do university teachings, external lecturing, or running practicals. And we do all sorts of training for community groups and events for schools and such like. And there's nothing better than showing kids the natural world. In fact, I'll be helping make a bug hotel on Friday. That's a local school. We try to make as much of our information available freely as possible. So we have a publications page that I try to keep up to date, although it does need some updates at the moment. There's a new paper published with Javed as the lead author that needs to go up there. But do take a look. It's really important to share information, I think. So how does biodiversity data help me as a professional ecologist? It helps me identify potential site sensitivities before I ever get to work on a project properly. It helps inform the design process if it's land management or development. It helps inform ecological appraisal at an earlier stage and can inform the novel survey design that I might choose to do for a site. It provides a context for an ecological impact assessment down the road and can help with monitoring. And it can also help us understand conservation status, distribution, and inform research, as Charlotte has made a good point of, and Mark also. There are lots of different types of data. So there's casual stuff, verified stuff, species, populations, habitats, and there's loads of different sources. There are some considerations and limitations to how I can use data though. So for example, permissions. There are different kinds of licenses. Here are some Creative Commons licenses, and they all have slightly different restrictions on how they can be used. So these three, the Open Government License, Creative Commons Zero, and Creative Commons with Attribution, I can use quite easily in either work for a development or for academic research and papers, as long as I stick to the rules. Whereas this license, non-commercial, is more difficult for me to use, although I do undertake to purchase data from data providers and such like permission to use data when it's not freely available. In fact, I've been doing quite a few data searches this week where we're paying for data. Accuracy. So the resolution can, so some records are more accurate than others, more likely to be the right species or whatnot. Resolution, is it high enough for the purpose? Confidentiality, sensitivity. So for example, some species are sensitive and protected, and you wouldn't want to make that information widely available, I would say. So for example, a golden eagle nest. Under-recorded groups are something to be aware of all the time, such as reptiles or invertebrates, because there tends not to be a lot of records, and I imagine glowworms are super under-recorded at the moment, although that's no doubt going to change with Charlotte driving interest in it all. But an important thing to always remember is absence of records does not demonstrate absence of presence, although having nil return records is really useful in understanding distribution too. So to show how data can be used, this is the site condition monitoring example. So we've done quite a lot of site condition monitoring for SNH and Nature Scots, as they're now known, over the years, and particularly invertebrate work. And there are published, so the previous slide was published reports, and there's some unpublished reports as well. The published reports you can get from SNH or Nature Scots website, as well as from our website. And we also publish papers based on some of the discoveries also. And we also try to make as much of our data available on the NBN Atlas as possible and under licenses that allow people to use it freely. So there are 158 invertebrate sites of special scientific interest with invertebrate features in Scotland. And this is a map of these sites. And there's a great review by Nick Littlewood that goes through them all that you can download from Nature Scot. We have done 57 site survey projects on 51 sites, and those are all indicated in pink on that map. And I would say it should be alarming if a site is very clearly visible at a map of that scale. So that demonstrates that some of these sites are absolutely huge, and I'll mention one of those in an example. But just to show some different kinds of data. So Cainlochan SSI, which is by Glen Shee. The species I was looking for there was Mycnargus patulus, the Scottish mountain spider, which is a rare species associated with Nardus strictus matgrass in snowbed habitats. And we know when adults have been recorded, although there are relatively few records of the species. So know where to find them. That's a map of the site. And in this case, I managed to get the historic records. SNH were able to provide them where the species had been found previously. So that helped target surveys. But we also used the habitat information. So we surveyed where it had been found before, and that's where we chose to put pitfall traps, which had been, I think, the successful method in the past. But we looked at other areas too, and actually found them at a new location on Glassmail there, in the right habitat, Nardus strictus, snowbed habitats, and the spider was actually there, right by my tent, so I needn't have wandered around so much, it turns out. Torridon Forest. So Torridon Forest is a wonderful site. This is my favorite part of Scotland. Scotland's a beautiful place, loads of wonderful parts, but this is my favorite. It includes Leach, which is just amazing, and Benny is not bad itself. I've surveyed this site for a number of species, but I've chosen Fratora polaris, type of leaf beetle, as an example. So it's actually found on Rua Stackmore, which is the highest point of Ben E, but confusingly, it is within the Torridon Forest SSI and not the Ben E SSI, but I think that's a land ownership thing. In this case, I was able to get historic records, which helped me target the surveys, or I wouldn't have known it was on Rua Stackmore rather than somewhere on Leach. It would take a long time to get from one to the other. I also found some really useful data on this in a slightly different format. So Mark Telfer, a fantastic and far better beetle guy than I am, had previously surveyed for this species and wrote a blog about the experience and everything. So that was really helpful. And just for context, this is Ben E, a beautiful, beautiful ridge. And to access, you use this lovely stone chute, which is great fun. And then you get on top of the ridge, and I was just using my putter to suck up invertebrates from under stones and whatnot, and I found Photora polaris no problem. A couple of locations. And I also found Stennis glacialis, which is a type of staphylinid beetle I've wanted to find for so long and looked for in sites it was known for and not found it. And then lo and behold, it turns up on Ruistac Moor where it had not been recorded previously, but it is a montane species, it's kind of expected that might turn up. Just shows how underrecorded things are. And this is another example of records. And I know Ashley is in the audience, but here are some, this is a museum reference collection at the Museum Collection Centre in Edinburgh. And we use that when we have the opportunity to. It's always a pleasure. And it's really necessary to have reference collections like this that holds so much data in so many different ways, but that helps us confirm difficult to identify or super rare species. Now, another example of a site was the Keringorms. So that site is 292.3 kilometers squared in size and has a huge range of habitats from mountains to forests. And at the time, it had a relatively poorly defined citation, but there was a big dossier of invertebrate records from the site that SNH, as was, had access to and was able to share, which is super helpful. And included loads of groups of animals, and we surveyed them all. And I'm just going to give an example. Well, oh, sorry, that's the site, quite big. So we targeted 3 different areas based on the species that we knew had been recorded in the past. And I'm just going to focus in here on mollusca, so snails, vertigo snails we were looking for, and Odonata, dragonflies and damselflies. So Odonata, it was a great example. So Jonathan Willett did this work, and he's fantastic. And there's quite good time series of data. So we're able to look at what's been found before and also in the wider area. And that gives us a better context for things. So that's a good example of how a decent data set and people recording helps interpret data. Not so much for snails. And a real problem with the snails is trying to decide where to look for them. But we were able to use, and this was Chris Cathrine, who's a fantastic invertebrate worker and all sorts of other ecologists. He looked at we were able to look at the geology to focus in on where to survey, which helped us narrow it down because we didn't have a huge amount of survey effort that we could use. Those are just a few examples. There's loads of examples of how data can be used. And there's some other presentations on the Caledonian Conservation website that go into data in different ways with more case studies. But basically, in conclusion, it's important to use the right data for the project. So species-specific, habitats, landscape scale. You need to be aware of permissions and data limitations, and that's something you might think about when you're recording yourself. Confidentiality and sensitivity, and that constant issue of underrecorded groups, which again, I'm sure includes glowworms. So absence of records does not demonstrate absence of presence, and that's such an important message. And as I say, we try to put as much data as we can. We do have limitations on what we can put up based on commercial agreements and also time, but we do try to bulk upload stuff to NBN when we get the opportunity. And that is the end of my talk. So I am going to stop sharing. So I think hopefully that's given you all time to think of more questions about glowworms, although I see quite a few questions have been answered as well. So shall we just bring back the panel?
Yep, I'm back.
Great.
Me too.
Woohoo!
That was brilliant. Cheers, Chris.
No problem. I still feel like the odd one out. Hopefully it was interesting.
You're going to see glowworms this year, I promise.
Great. Well, I'm sure my kids will enjoy that too. So I don't quite know how questions work, so Mark might be able to help me with this.
Yes.
Is it only us who can see the questions in the Q&A?
I think I think other people can see the Q&As. I think they I can't remember now. I did have a look at how they appeared, but I think people can see the Q&As. So
Cool.
I have tried to put some written answers in as I went along, but feel free to add to any of those
cool.
as you wish.
Thanks.
And feel free to read out any that you think might be of interest to people as well. There's a few unanswered ones there which might be useful to go through anyway. So I'm sure Charlotte might be able to expand on one or two of those.
Hopefully.
So I'm happy if maybe we go through the questions that haven't been answered first, and then we can maybe have a look at some of the other ones if we have time. So David Kelly has asked, is there a known spectrum of light which attracts the males and can be drawn to artificial sources such as actinic bulbs and whatnot?
Yeah, I kind of left that out, David, because during my survey work, I do use artificial lures. And the reason that I do that is because I've got a few sites where I haven't seen the glowing females, but the males have come to the lures, and that has been great at confirming species presence on site. However, they can be horribly misused, remembering that they've only got this finite amount of energy that has to take them through the reproductive stage. So I don't kind of advertise them. However, the females, I think the glow wavelength, I'm not going to remember this now. I think it's around 555 nm. The lures that I use are not that wavelength, and I solder them up myself with a specific LED with a specific resistor, and I use them incredibly responsibly. They're only put out on the outward transect, and they are picked up very quickly on the way back, examined for males, and then very swiftly turned off. As for moth traps and that's another, it's a great suggestion. I think males have been found in moth traps. So, any mothers out there, I'm a mother myself, and I'm always looking in the trap during the kind of breeding season to see if we've got any glowy boys in there. Yet to see one, but I know that they have been found in moth traps. They do, I think, although I've mentioned the red torchlight, I think males will be attracted to sometimes to that red torchlight. So yeah, they are attracted to other lights. I don't mean to sound condescending about the lures. It's just, it is a dark art, and it's the same as I'm sure any mothers out there using pheromone lures. They have to be used incredibly responsibly. However, for organizations, like yourself or any of the like nature reserves or whatever, Emma up at Cashel has had training on how to use them. I'm not saying that I'm an expert, but I was taught by an expert how to use them. And it's not something that we would typically advertise doing. However, it is a really useful tool for confirming species presence. I wouldn't have had those records had I not used the lures. So I'm certainly happy if somebody wants to get in touch with me to discuss them, and I don't own the Glowworms of Scotland, but it's great to have a conversation of how they can be used responsibly, and the data that you can get back in for them. So certainly happy to have a one-to-one discussion about the use of lures. Perfectly happy with that. But yeah, any mothers out there, look at your traps in the, any of that moth trap intruders. Have a good look to see if you've got any males in there during the season. I hope that's answered your question, David. I hope that's, and it hasn't sounded condescending, because I certainly don't mean to sound condescending.
Charlotte, just to say, I know quite a few moth trappers around here, and I know people who've been trapping for years in D&G, and I'm not aware of anybody ever making a record from them. So I think it's quite unlikely that moth trap light probably hits the right wavelength or sufficient for them to attract them. I'm guessing, but just because of the volume of moth trappers down in here, unless I don't know if anybody from UK Glowworm survey has ever heard of them coming up in moth traps, but
there's somebody in there, there's Vivian, who's on the UK Glowworm survey group, and she has had GW males in her moth tracks.
Oh, interesting, fascinating.
So there is obviously a chance, I assume, that they'll go in. I'm pretty sure that the female's glow is around 555 nm, and I don't even know what nm stands for. Is it a nanometer? I think it is. I don't really understand the wavelengths. At the minute, I am actually currently researching. There is excellent research out there about the male's color vision, and you know, the glow intensity of females and whatever. But as regards the lures, until, you know, such time, we just can't have them out there being used willy-nilly. It's not fair until we've got a greater data set of how the glowworms are doing in Scotland. To be interfering with their reproduction stage is quite a dark art, and it's better to have a one-to-one conversation. And I'm not to say I'm a great trainer, but at least I've been trained how to use them responsibly, and I can pass that on.
Cool, that's really interesting. Somebody said they have a population close to where they were brought up in Perthshire, and they were on a north-facing slope that was quite sheltered. And yeah, they're asking if that's unusual.
Yeah, I saw that. That was David. Charlotte and I have talked about aspect in relation to glowworms. Again, it's very difficult to say for sure, but there doesn't seem to be any preference north, south, east, west, warm, hot, cold. They don't seem to seek out, you know, a particularly sunny spot, or, you know, or during the day or anything of that sort. As far as we know, it's very difficult to say any of this with any certainty. But because they seem to be so adaptable as species. Sheltered wise, we've discussed, Charlotte's, you know, touched on finding a female on the very edge of the rock, at the very edge of the shore, very exposed to wind and indeed the sea. So they don't seem to mind being very much out in the open. Again, maybe at different parts of their life stages and life cycle, they will seek out vegetative places and more cover. But when it comes to the glowing female, it's very difficult to say. Would you agree with that, Charlotte?
Yeah, I'm quite a few of the sites that I go on where we find the females. It doesn't seem that they don't seem to show a particular preference. I think it's going to come down to, again, it's data. It's getting that data in. Scotland could be very well different from England and for the rest of Europe. Finland, I kind of sort of like look to Finland for a lot of the research, because we're not exactly on the same latitude, but we're kind of there, and quite similar habitat wise. So I don't see a difference, but as you've seen by my map, I haven't got to a great many places, and as the data comes in and where these females are and you know, where the species is being found, we can build up that data set of their habitat and the aspect preferences. Cool. I hope that's answered the question. I hope that's given enough information.
Yeah, I think so. Alan has asked about, so he says, as the larvae and females don't fly, this presumably limits their ability to disperse and colonize new areas. Yes,
it interferes with that greatly. It's really only the larvae that distribute. I think there's some glowworm researchers in the audience there, and they'll maybe be able to correct me, but I'm pretty sure the larvae will only distribute about 100 meters a year given the right habitat. They're a pretty slow dispersing species. Obviously, with the females being flightless, there isn't that opportunity. However, how did they get to Cumbrae? How did they float there on vegetation? Were they taken over there with sheep? So although naturally they probably aren't going to disperse to any great distance, there is the potential there. If you look at the records that are found on transport networks, for instance, it could well be that glowworms are picked up by passing trains and, you know, placed further up the track. I found glowworms lying on my main site in the middle of the road. There's no way that she got there by herself. It was too far to get there. She was obviously swept up by a lorry and then put back down. So there is that. I often have an argument with a a really experienced glowworm researcher, and I know he's in the audience, about things like coming in with railway ballasts and things like that. Again, that's a you know, a hot topic for debate, and we'll argue with that until the day that we die, I'm sure. But as a species itself, it really is only that larva that gets the chance to disperse, and increasingly, I think in other parts of the UK and across Europe and whatever, that's probably not helped with them being so fragmented, that, you know, their populations are so fragmented.
Dave has asked, are they synchronized in any way, either locally, regionally, or nationally?
Again, this is going to come down to data. There is data to suggest that the more northerly and westerly the populations, the earlier the glowing season. I've only been surveying for 3 years, so I can't, you know, I'd have to look back at all the other records. As for synchronizing, not quite sure if you mean by those I can never pronounce it, synchronized fireflies that you get over in America. That so again, that whole behavior is something that needs investigated. Again, there's research, great research that comes out of Europe, England and Finland, about the competitive nature maybe of the females, you know, the brightness of the glows and whatever. As for the start of the glowing season, if that's what you mean, it is very variable, and it will, I'm sure, depend on environmental factors, what the weather has been like. I know last year was a really bad year. We had that horrible frost. We had snow here in May. I was still like defrosting my plants in their containers in May. So I'm pretty sure that they got hard knocked by that. The numbers weren't so great last year on the main site. So I can't really answer that one, and it's another one of those ones that's going to need data just to come in, loads more records, so that we can kind of look at the dates that the displaying season starts and see how that relates to where they are in the country, northerly, westerly, easterly, that, you know, that kind of thing.
Cool.
Just like to chip in there, if that's all right, Kristen.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
I see Wilma Harper's in the chat. Wilma very kindly suggested another aspect of inquiry and research and investigation would be to contact those people who are recording snails. And we've now got a website to look into for that. I think we could definitely explore that, Charlotte. I think,
yeah, brilliant.
Because there's clearly a lot of correlation with the species. So if there are people out there recording snails and recording perhaps species of snail, and they basically understand the habitats and which type of snail that even the glowworms are eating, then the better we can start to build up that picture of the full ecosystem and what that tells us about the ecology of the glowworm. So that's definitely something I think to explore. Thanks for that, Wilma.
Cool. I wonder if that's a good point to end on, because we have gone over quite a bit, and I know that people are having to leave and things. And I think collaborative working is always a good thing, and finding ways to join up is fantastic.
Yeah. I know there's a question there from Ian Moody about the PopGen work that I'm doing. I will answer you. I think I'm pretty sure you're on the Twitter, so, and I've got your email address obviously through the Eventbrite, so I will reply to you by email. There's another question there by Dave M. Do they start to glow at the same time? There's a lassie down in Wales that's got a huge site, the Great Orme, and she actually did a great campaign getting the locals to campaign for their local council to switch the street lights out. So that's another thing that can be looked into for Scotland if artificial light is a factor. So I will reply to anybody that's not had their question answered.
And we can all see very clearly the Twitter handle on Mark and Davina's backgrounds. So you can find Charlotte and continue asking her questions online.
As regards hotspots, there's a question there. Sorry, Charlotte.
No, go on.
I was just going to say about the hotspots. It's tempting in some ways to read that both ways, two different ways. So in some respects, we don't really want people, you know, marching off to a known glowworm site that's got brilliant records in the likes of Wales or England that we know about, and potentially disturbing you know, the populations there. This is not a spectator sport in lots of ways. It's fun, you know, to find them and magical experience, but really what we want to encourage is to find new hotspots. And someone asked earlier, Charlotte, about target areas. I would say pretty much anywhere. We need to find out if there is a meta population somewhere, if there, you know, this is what we want to find out. There is no target area. The target area is the whole of Scotland potentially. So yeah, we have a feeling about certain places like forestry, sheep farming, the edge habitats we talked about, and that's a good place to start. But regionally, all bets are off, I would say.
Yeah, and it is, and I know Argyll and Bute and Dumfries and Galloway are in this competitive, who's got the biggest population. But personally, I'm pretty sure that South Lanarkshire is going to be up there one day. So anybody from South Lanarkshire, come on, we've got to find glowworms in South Lanarkshire. There's personal pride here, and also the Highlands. I mean, to be able to find glowworms in the Highlands, there is some historical records. Again, get in touch.
The dark skies.
Myself or Mark, and we can point you in the direction of historical.
We have potential for so much potential in Scotland for dark skies, unimproved habitats, you know, mixed habitats that we talked about where there's been very little human intervention, and the potential is huge.
I think so. And there's also potential for other species. You know, Fiona couldn't be here tonight, but she was going to talk about the first time she came out on a glowworm survey with me. Mark knows where we went, and it's a well-known wild boar habitat. So there was a pair of us creeping around in the dark, trying not to attract wild boar, both a bit scared, to be honest. And we saw a couple of females, and that was great. We kind of resurrected Mark's brilliant record. But what we also saw was magpie moths. We saw so much, and it's not just about the glowworms. There's this whole other world at night that people don't know about, and it's about shouting about all of that as well. And it's about celebrating our countryside at night. That you know, it's a completely different beast, and it's a completely different experience to be immersed in that habitat at night. And I don't know, maybe I'm a vampire, but I love it. I absolutely love being out in the dark, looking for these wee beasties. And I can absolutely promise any of you that haven't seen one, your first sight of a glowing female will go with you to the grave. It is something that's almost, and I'm not a spiritual person, but it is almost spiritual to see this little wee beastie glowing her little heart out, and she doesn't give a hoot that you're there. And all she cares about is she's dressed up for the night, and she's looking to pick up a nice bloke. And I think that's brilliant.
I think we should end there. That's
I think we probably should end. That's a wonderful point to end. I think Mark might be going to say.
I was just going to say a quick shout out to the walk from that Emma has been. I've posted a link in the chat. Yeah. But there's a nice walk going on this summer at Cashel Forest. So chance to book on that online via Eventbrite if you want to search for that. I'm sure you'll be able to find it. There's a link in the chat if you want to follow that link now. Possible chance that there might be a walk in Dumfries and Galloway as well, which will depend a little bit on landowner permissions and sorting that out, but one or two other factors. But if we can, we'll try and do a walk and maybe go and have a pop up to the Kissock site again. And see whether we can find them. Many eyes do make light work, and it was I found one or two, I think, on the very first visit, and then led a walk there a few years later, and it went up to 8 one year, and another walk next year we ended up with 13 or 15 or so. So if you have a number of eyes, it's amazing how much it helps when you have them out there. So a little group walk around a site like that might well turn up a few individuals. So.
And I'm getting on a bit, and my eyes aren't so great. So anybody that would like to come and join me is more than welcome. More than welcome.
Excellent.
Cool. Somebody's asking in the chat if the Q&A will be available to read later on. I don't know about Zoom. What do you feel about that, Chris? Is that going to be available?
I don't know how to make it available. Does Mark?
Chris, I think once the meeting's over, you can see the Q&A in your Zoom reports. And I think you can download that as a text document or something.
I will try.
So that could be, if that's around, we can post. If you can extract that, I think you can send that to Charlotte to post somewhere on her website or something like that.
I will
Thank
try
you for all the
that.
technical assistance, guys.
Thank you, Mark.
And thank you to all of the rest of you. You've been amazing tonight. Thank you. And thank you to everybody that attended and listening to us. It's floored me.
Support.
And definitely thank you to everyone who spoke. But the biggest thanks has to go to Charlotte, who actually made this happen and puts all this energy into glowworms and is making them a real thing in Scotland. So well done, Charlotte.
I think I need to get out more, possibly, maybe get a life. I'm not sure.
You need to get out to look for glowworms more.
I know. Roll on June. I'm itching for June to come, believe me.
Cool. In that case, thank you everybody for joining us, and I think we'll end the talk and the recording here.
Brilliant. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye, guys.
guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.